Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of GamerVision. I'm just one of your hosts, Tridrachius or Jeff, whatever you want to call me, from just one more level.
And I'm Tony from Procedurally Generated.
All right, and we've got a pretty good episode today. I think it's a topic that, again, seems to be a little confusing for some people. Dealing with accessibility in gaming, there seems to be a pretty not quite a hot topic. I don't think there's really people, going at each other like the fanboy wars or anything like that. But there's definitely people out there that I don't think fully grasp what accessibility in gaming necessarily means.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about it today. We're going to have a discussion of sorts uh, of all the different things that deals with accessibility, whether it's just difficulty or if it's a type of controller or a play style, and just what developers are looking at. And I know, Tony, you pulled a wonderful source from Microsoft about how, like, what they look at, all of the different things. Like, they have a quite a list of things that they look at to try to make sure that their games are accessible
Yeah.
to as many people as possible.
Yeah, and this is a topic that I wanted to bring up on the show from some Twitter conversations that I'd seen probably 3 or 4 weeks ago around games like Dark Souls and the difficulty level of Dark Souls, and people talking about that game being accessible and focusing, like hyper focusing on the difficulty level of a game like Dark Souls as an accessibility thing, and stemming from a lot of people who are fans of like the Dark Souls series or the Demon Souls or Bloodborne, talking about how that's not a game that everybody can play, and that's true.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of Dark Souls because I find it to be ridiculously difficult. I don't like the drop into a game and 5 seconds later you're dead because you happen to take a wrong turn. There are some where it works a little bit. Xenoblade Chronicles, for instance, is a game that is very similar in that manner, where you can get into an area that you're not supposed to be because you're not ready for that yet. But it's more or less clearly noted with giant numbers over monsters' heads saying, hey, you shouldn't be here yet. And so I wanted to just, what is accessibility? Is it specifically a difficulty level? Is it physical limitations? What is it? Because I'm very much of the opinion that every game should be playable by everybody in some form. I know that's not feasible, it's not a realistic expectation, but I would like to see more games accessible by more people.
Well, and one thing that I pulled from the list from Microsoft's website, I like a lot of the bullet points that they have when they start looking at, is your game accessible? And like some of the things on here, it's like, can you complete the game using a single hand? I know there's a few franchises, Suikoden, for instance. I know that there's a couple games that you can actually play in that franchise where you can just play with one hand. You don't have to, have both hands, uh, largely because camera control is handled by the game, and like you still have access to
The,
quite a
the
few
more
buttons.
recent Pokemon games are another example of games that can be
Yeah.
playable with one controller. In fact, like the Pokemon Let's Go games won't let you use two Joy Cons. So unless they're connected to the system itself, you can't have two separate Joy Cons. You can only use one if you're doing it that way.
Well, you can use the little
Yeah.
Pokeball controller thing. And it's just a joystick, but it has you can click in.
Mm-hmm.
It's got the little button on top, and so like you can definitely play the game just using that with very easily.
Yeah.
Um, but then like also do you support more than one type of input device that can be used throughout the entire game? And Microsoft is kind of leading
Mm,
leading the
absolutely.
charge of sorts, because they literally have a controller called the Microsoft Accessibility Controller,
Mm.
and you can use it for any game out there, or I'm pretty sure any game out there. Um, But then things like, can you play the game with the sound muted? Can you play it, with a monitor that's just black and white? One of the things that even for me, I'm a hardcore RPG nerd. I love playing RPGs. They're
Yeah.
my favorite genre out there. And one of the bullet points on it, and we talked a little bit before going into this episode, is just, you know, there's times where I'm playing a game and then life happens. Things just pop up, and a week turns into 2 weeks, 2 weeks turns into a month, and then you finally find time to go back to the RPG that you're playing. And what was I doing
Yeah, you're
a month
standing
ago?
outside a cave and you're like, I put myself here
Yeah,
specifically because that would remind me what I needed to do next, but it's been 3 months and I have no idea what I'm
yeah.
doing here.
So it's like, okay, well, let me try to figure out. Let me go back into the cave and let me see. Okay, well, there's nothing really in the beginning of the cave that lets me know what I was doing, whether or not I've already been here or not. And you know, too often I end up just not. I either fully restart the game with the intention of getting further, but then life happens and
Yeah,
then I get
of
distracted and
course.
then things happen and I just end up not actually finishing the game.
Yeah,
Um,
the Dragon Quest series is really good about that. At least the recent games, where every time you boot up the game, and it's not like every time, 3 months later, it's like, hey, here's what you were doing. Every single time you boot up the game, it gives you a little snippet about what had happened in the story previously to give you that little bit of a memory jog to remember what you were supposed to do. It's a small
yeah.
little thing, but it's really nice because there have been times when I've stepped away from a game and I just cannot remember what I'm doing. And I'm like, I really want
Yeah,
to play this game, but I don't want to have to start over because I forgot what I'm
yeah,
doing. I guess I could look up a walkthrough, but even that's like, you have to go
yeah,
to a separate source. It would be nice if the game just said, hey, here's what you were doing. Keep going from here.
yeah. And you were talking about the similarities, but also the vast differences between like the very first Final Fantasy
Yeah.
and Dragon Quest XI. And gaming has definitely come a long way in the oh,
It's been 30
30
plus
plus years.
years since Final Fantasy 1. I was thinking about that the other
Oh,
day. Yeah, cuz I'm playing the Final Fantasy 1 Pixel Remaster. I'm playing it on my tablet actually.
oof,
And I tweeted the other day that playing this game is just a stark reminder of how much better RPGs are to play now than they were 30 plus years ago.
RPGs, I feel like developers are starting to really understand that maybe not every RPG needs to be 100
Yeah.
hours or 200 hours, and I think that kind of helps a little bit with like figuring out how to make the game a little bit more accessible,
Hmm.
by not just having 10, 20, or 30 hours of just filler stuff in there, to keep people fully engaged and just get through the game.
Yeah. Well, like one thing that I had never really thought about as an accessibility option, but is something that can make or break a game for me, is simply being able to invert the camera controls. I am an inverted camera guy. I'm probably one of a dying breed. Most people, like my kids, look at me like I'm a dinosaur because I play with inverted camera controls, and they just think it's weird. But that small
Well,
little option can make or break a game because my brain is so wired into pushing down on the right stick to look up and pushing up on the stick to look down. So if I'm playing a game that is really reliant on camera controls and I can't do that, I can't play the game. It just takes me out of the experience, and every time I move the camera, I'm like, oh, I'm going the wrong way, and I have to think about. I have to really think about simply just moving the camera.
you're definitely, for the most part, you're kind of rare. I mean, it is kind of but
It's inverted
anybody,
or nothing, man. Inverted or nothing.
uh, yeah, the previous show that I did with just one more topic, longtime friend and just someone that I got really close to and just co-host to Boreas. Um, he was exactly the same way, and it ended up going into like his catchphrase of him being an airplane. Just
Yeah. It's one of those things that it doesn't make sense when you first think about it. But for me, I think of the camera controls as someone having their hand on the top of your head And if they're looking down at you, if they want to make you look up, they have to push backwards. So that's how it makes sense in my brain. That's always how it's been. I don't do that with a mouse. If I'm playing with mouse and keyboard, pushing up on the mouse moves the camera up. It's only playing with a controller in my hand that I have to invert the controls.
There's so many things, just so many things about the accessibility, the inverted, like the when Sony was introducing the PlayStation 5 with the DualSense
Mm-hmm.
controller, the haptic triggers, the HD rumble, which I know Nintendo's kind of toyed around with like the Pro controller for
Yeah.
them and just the Joy Cons, but just like being able to turn settings off or being able to adjust things and the recent like Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, you can go into the settings and you can to give you so many uh, like options to change colors and
Yeah.
mirror modes and all kinds of stuff. Like just being able to give the player the control to comfortably
Yeah.
play the game in front of them.
Insomniac's been one of probably the better developers in just giving you like things that you probably that most people will never touch in a menu, but giving you so many different ways to tweak the gameplay experience to make it something better for you. Like I have a friend who's
Yeah,
colorblind, and the colorblind option, something I don't ever think of because I see what I assume is normal color, but he can't.
yeah,
So it's been interesting sometimes playing games with him and having to trying to describe things based on color and trying to remember that he can't see things the way that I see them, and then trying to figure out
yeah.
other ways to explain to him what I'm doing or what I'm seeing so that he can, be at the same place or be shooting at the same thing or whatever it is.
Briefly talked about. We don't really have any notes on it, but just VR and just the steps that it needs to take
Yeah.
to become
Yeah,
more accessible. Because
that's gonna add a whole other layer of accessibility difficulty trying to figure out how things are gonna work in
yeah,
VR. Microsoft has been by far the best company, I think, in terms of
yes,
accessibility for people playing games. Not just aside from difficulty level, aside from all of that, probably a separate topic all on its own. But that
yeah,
accessibility controller that they have, and pushing that, and getting developers to think about how people who can't play a game the way that 95% of the gaming population will be able to play.
yeah.
And so having that controller is amazing. I don't know if you've seen it, if you've seen any video on
Yeah.
it, but it is a fantastic controller with dozens of inputs and input options and things that you can use to
Yeah.
control with your mouth or with your eyes or what have you. And I think that is something that Nintendo and Sony need to license from Microsoft. Microsoft, whether they make money, I think they should just license it to them for free. Um,
Yeah.
but they are a business, so I would understand if they would put some licensing fee on it, whatever. But Nintendo and Sony really need to license that tech from Microsoft for their systems as well.
Just going through, I think it was called the Windows Developer. Um, well, I'll try to put the link into the description for it so that people can go and just
Yeah.
see just all of the things that Microsoft is looking at. This is not just a fly by night thing. They've got a special controller that they're focusing on. You found on Twitter, just like today,
Earlier
the day
today,
that we were
yeah,
going to film, that they're partnering with the Special
hmm
Olympics to do
a gaming
tournaments.
tournament, yeah,
So like this is something that obviously people higher up in Microsoft are like, hey, this should be a focus, and if other companies aren't going to take the steps necessary, we're going to do it. So I've got all of the respect and kudos for Microsoft in doing that because
yeah,
they're leading the charge on this. Like
yeah.
Sony's doing their things, Nintendo's doing their things,
Microsoft
Steam or Valve.
Microsoft is also
Uh,
putting that push in their mobile development as well, with like
yeah,
xCloud on mobile devices, where they've given developers and are trying to encourage developers to use all of the different tools they have for mobile games to make it so that players can play games on a mobile touch device without any of the traditional controls. And I've played around with some of their experiences, and they're really, really good. They give you the ability to customize the controls on the screen so that you don't just have the giant clunky virtual, controller that takes up 75% of the screen and you can barely
Yeah.
see what's going on. They try to make it so that you optimize the controls so that you only have the controls on the screen that you absolutely need at that moment in the game.
Which is something that Sony definitely, they've got the Remote Play app. It's atrocious. It is awful. There's so many things that just cover the screen. It's just, like, you can tell that it is not. They're like, oh yeah, it's on mobile. Yeah,
Yeah.
it has every button available. But this is something that Microsoft is again just at the forefront of. And there's so many other things that we could talk about as far as accessibility. It's like 14 or 15 pages on just Microsoft's thing
Yeah,
alone.
and that's only
Uh,
like the physical aspect of accessibility. Then you've
yeah,
got that whole difficulty level conversation, which
yeah,
I think any developer that gives anybody the option to play on whatever difficulty level you want to play on easy, and that's the experience that you want to have, go for it. I don't care. It doesn't affect me at all whether you're
yeah,
playing on the hardest difficulty, the easiest difficulty. I think Tom Happ, the developer of Axiom Verge, with his upcoming game, Axiom Verge 2, is going to give you the ability to just skip whole sections of the game if you're finding them too tough. But at the same time, for those players that want that experience, and want that difficulty, if you fight all the bosses, you're going to get extra bonuses for doing such. But you're not going to be punished because you find a section of a game too hard to play and you just want to skip it and continue on.
yeah.
So we're seeing
True.
a lot of developers toy with the difficulty options in games and giving players the ability to. If you want to just see the story, there are some developers that are giving you the story version of the game where you go and you play, and all of the enemy interactions are just gone, and you're just playing through and exploring the world and seeing the story.
Yeah,
And I think that's
which I
great. I would love to be able to play games like Bloodborne, Dark Souls, but those are games that I find too difficult, and I don't have time to
yeah,
put
yeah,
dozens and dozens of hours into that game to get good.
yeah, and that's kind of where I run into as well. Like, I started Bloodborne. It seems like a great game. People love it. It's fantastic. It's just the learning curve
Mm-hmm.
just skyrockets after a little bit to the not quite to the level of like Dark Souls, because like with Dark Souls you literally can die in like the first 5 to 10 seconds,
Yeah.
like without even knowing you're walking, something falls on you, you're dead. But um, but yeah, I feel like there's so much to talk about in this one, and we don't really pick easy topics.
No,
We
we
try to
don't.
shrink down. So E3, Steam Deck, accessibility.
One of
But
these days, we're gonna find something that's just like a 5 minute topic, and we're not gonna know what to do with ourselves.
RPGs are great. Okay, we're done. So,
It's true, but they're
but
too long.
in the comments, just make sure that post, suggest what you think, the things that you would like to see us talk about in future episodes, things that you notice about accessibility that we didn't talk about, which there's a lot that, I mean, we've had to cut a lot of stuff
Yeah.
out of this already, but
If there's
just let
someone who's dealing with accessibility issues in games
yes.
that you'd like to see us talk to, give us those recommendations as well, and we'll reach out to them and see what we can do.
Yeah, because like there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff to talk about, and it's not just difficulty in games. It's not just a controller. It's not just one little setting
Mm.
in the menus. It's everything. It is everything. And again, kudos to Microsoft for taking the steps and saying, "Hey, here's what we're doing." Um, but we will see you guys with the next. We're getting a little bit faster. We're getting a little bit faster with the filming and editing and stuff, all the behind the scenes.
Yep.
And we'll see you with episode 8. Episode
Yes,
8
episode 8.
of GamerVision. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Tony.